Hello. So, hope everyone can hear me all right. on a new setup this week. So I've been building a computer slowly to try and something that can just do the studio stuff. So hopefully it's all right and you can hear me all right. There should be like less hiss on the mic as well, I think, this week, because I had a little tweak with that. And then also we should be live on Twitter. So I don't know if anyone from Twitter with no T there is watching. Audio okay, Ralph Hexham says. I'm looking on Twitter and then there's no views at the moment. Okay, that's right. That's good though. You can go on Twitter as well. We've got Ralph Hexham and The Only Way Out Is In. Hello, both of you, and you're both on YouTube. Yeah, so I've got a big screen to the side of me and then another screen in front of me next to the camera. So if I keep looking round, that's why. Candles lit again this week. That's you've got to work out the significance of that yourself. Why some weeks the candle isn't lit. I'll give you a clue. It's because I don't have a lighter. Hello to GCHQ on Twitter. Yeah. Well, they could learn a thing or two about the world. So we're on chapter 11, which is the momentary universe. I haven't got a laptop in front of me anymore. I've just got a keyboard and a mouse, so it's quite liberating. But the screen's a bit far away. That's the only thing. So anyway, we're gonna be, if you haven't watched this before, because you're watching from GCHQ Twitter, we've been reading Stan Gooch's 1972 book, Total Man, and we're now on chapter 11. So I'm going to just try and find where we were, and then we'll just carry on, because we was on a chapter about synchronicity and the I Ching, and where the I Ching fits in with Gooch's hybrid origin theory. And what this chapter's basically trying to highlight is that, as well as the scientific method, there's an opposite method that exists. That is a System B method, and that is the I Ching, which is, it's not just the I Ching, but there's other books like it, and it's a way of sampling the randomness of the universe in order to find answers, as opposed to the empirical method of cause and effect, or whatever you want to call that, causality. So it's acausal. So I think the last bit we done was with this. We ended on a bit where we were just about to go into synchronicity. So we discussed the I Ching, and we were going to go into the part 2 of chapter 11, which is about synchronicity. So I'll just read the last bit. And it was Jung, a quote from Jung, which said, "Experimenting with synchronicity seems to be impossible under ordinary conditions. In the I Ching, the only criterion of the validity of synchronicity is the observer's opinion that the text of the hexagram amounts to a true rendering of his psychic condition. And then back to the book. With this, we may again broaden the discussion and undertake a consideration of the meaning of coincidence, or to use Jung's term, synchronicity. Okay. Jung's principle of synchronicity is adopted by the present book to function as what has this far been referred to as the alternative principle, that principle which complements the reality principle and stands in the same relation to the unconscious or sleeping consciousness as the latter does to waking consciousness. Jung has expressed his views on synchronicity a number of times, besides in the foreword to the I Ching. His most explicit exposition is found in Volume 8 of his collected works in a long essay entitled Synchronicity, an Acausal Connecting Principle. One cannot do justice here to the full argument. Those interested are referred to Jung's own text. However, one or two brief extracts will convey something of his direction and will serve to show how Jung's, of course prior, thought tends to resemble the views taken by this book towards System B and of sleeping consciousness. What follows now is some quotes from Jung's work, from Volume 8 of his collected works. I hope it will not be construed as presumption on my part if I make uncommon demands on the open-mindedness and goodwill of the reader. Not only is he expected to plunge into regions of human experience which are dark, dubious, and hedged about with prejudice, but the intellectual difficulties are such as the treatment and elucidation of so abstract a subject must nevertheless entail. There can be no question of a complete description and explanation of these complicated phenomena, but only an attempt to broaden the problem in such a way as to reveal some of its manifold aspects and connections and open up a very obscure field which is philosophically of the greatest importance. Synchronicity is certainly not a knowledge that could be connected with the ego, and hence not a conscious knowledge as we know it, but rather a self-subsistent and unconscious knowledge which I would prefer to call absolute knowledge. It is not cognition, but, as Leibniz so excellently calls it, a perceiving. If we are correct in this assumption, then we must ask ourselves whether there is some other nervous substrate in us, apart from the cerebrum, that can think or perceive. It turns out that bees not only tell their comrades by means of a peculiar sort of dance that they have found a feeding place, but they also indicate its direction and distance, thus enabling the beginners to fly to it directly. This kind of message is no different in principle from information conveyed by a human being. In the latter case, we would certainly regard such behavior as a conscious and intentional act. Nevertheless, it would be possible to suppose that in bees the process is unconscious. But that would not help solve the problem, because we are still faced with the fact that the ganglionic system apparently achieves exactly the same results as the cerebral cortex. Thus, we are driven to the conclusion that a nervous substrate like the sympathetic system, which is absolutely different from the cerebrospinal system in point of origin and function, can evidently produce thoughts and perceptions just as easily as the latter. What then are we to think of the sympathetic system in vertebrates? Synchronicity is what is normally termed coincidence. Actually, that is not wholly true. It is likely, I suggest, that there not only is, but probably always will be, a body of synchronous events that are accurately and fairly described by the word coincidental, which are, that is, completely fortuitous. Within that body of events, however, one proposes that there are other events at first sight perhaps in no way dissimilar, but which are nonetheless not fortuitous. One may call them meaningful coincidences. To request an accurate definition of meaningful coincidence and to ask for unimpeachable instances is precisely to state the problem which now faces us. I am myself of the opinion that Jung's attempts to demonstrate synchronicity in the essays cited by the application of normal statistical techniques may well not be an advisable approach. To concede, at any rate, the normal use of statistics is to allow the enemy, that is, the skeptic, the choice of weapons. This is an advantage to one's opponent, which one should not be over ready to concede. Quite apart from the strategic consideration, however, bearing in mind what this text has reiterated over and over again, i.e. that the attributes and functions of System A and System B are diametrically opposed, it is likely that the statistical method is wholly irrelevant to the matters in hand. Having said that, let us then, however, concede that some modified statistical approach might perhaps be of use in these areas. It should certainly not be thought, in any case, that one is refusing to admit the need for validation of one kind or another. Jung's approach is essentially that of demonstrating that the odds against a particular event happening by chance are so astronomical that an opponent is thereby obliged to concede that something other than chance is at work. This is also essentially the approach of J.B. Rhine and others in their investigation of extrasensory perception, the acquisition of information other than by means of the known senses. The method is, indeed, the standard practice in most psychological research. At least in the kinds of uncontrolled situations described by Jung, however, one has, in the first place, no reliable means of determining what constitutes a chance result. As a few examples taken from the behaviour of a roulette wheel will later show, odds of a very high order against their happening do not prevent the occurrence of certain remarkable incidents. Jung cites various estimates by mathematicians and philosophers of the against chance odds in certain cases of precognition, the knowing that an event is going to happen before it happens, and of various allegedly meaningful coincidences. Xavier Darieux estimated odds of 4,114,545 to 1 against precognition of death being due to chance. C. Flammarion reckoned the odds for a particular instance of a similar phenomenon as being 804,622,222 to 1. Jung himself, in the course of the essay on synchronicity, describes a detailed investigation of his own into the relationship of personal zodiac signs, as prescribed by astrology, and certain outcomes. He produced results with an against chance outcome of 10 million to 1. Finally, Jung reports, without giving a precise textual reference, that in one of J.B. Rhine's published experiments in extrasensory perception, which involved guessing ahead of time the order of a shuffled pack of 25 cards, made up of 5 sets of 4 designs, one subject correctly guessed the order of all 25 cards. The odds against this happening by chance are 298. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It's 18 numbers to 1. The present author's opinion is that in the face of this last dumbfounding result, assuming that it was indeed obtained under the experimental conditions specified, the psychological establishment must, on its own terms, strike its colours and concede that extrasensory perception, whatever that may be, occurs. In other areas of psychological research, it should be pointed out the psychologist accepts odds of 20 to 1 against chance as indicating a significant result. That many psychologists have not conceded the victory is, in my own, as well as many other people's views, because they have some personal need to reject these findings. In the areas under discussion, psychologists seem in general to be looking for negative, not positive results. It would appear that Western scientists generally are as resistant to, or as prejudiced against, the idea of non-causal relationship of events as the East has traditionally been to the idea of causality. The evidence suggests that it is as hard for a scientist to accept non-causality or synchronicity as it is, say, for a Papuan native to accept that illness is caused by organisms in the bloodstream. Our language really requires 2 words for prejudice. One for System A rigidity and one for System B's intransigence. That's, we need to... Right, so Ralph saying 18 zeros is trillions. Okay, so shall I try and read that number again? 298 trillion, 23... I don't know. No, is it? Because there's another 3 after that, anyway. Mike sounds a bit hot, overdriven from your end. Yep, bit raspy. Maybe I can pull away a little bit. No, actually, let's just go with it. Let's go with it for the moment. Because changing it means going over to the other side of the studio and change it, because I haven't got a producer. I'm working on my own. So yeah, we want 2 words for prejudice. We want system A, rigidity, and system B's intransigence. Let us now turn to a consideration of certain behaviours of the roulette wheel. In the course of this consideration, the question of the meaning of results is introduced. A roulette wheel, when a 0 is included, has on its circumference 37 divisions numbered randomly from 0 to 36 inclusive. The odds against any specific number being produced on any one spin of the wheel are 36 to 1. One evening, I was present in a casino when, in the course of normal play, the croupier spun the number 4 times in succession. I was astonished by the occurrence and asked the croupier if she was not also surprised. She replied, indifferently, that she had spun one number 4 times on a previous occasion and was now waiting for the occurrence of the same number 5 times. The odds against the particular number being produced are, as we know, 36 to 1. The odds against the same number occurring twice in succession are 36 to the power of 2 to 1. And of the same number turning up 4 times, 36 to the power of 4 to 1. That is 1,679,616 to 1. That is the odds against the event which I saw were over 1.5 million to 1. If the croupier ever realises her ambition of spinning the same number 5 times in succession, not apparently an impossible task in view of her 2 spins of 4, and in fact only 36 times more unlikely than either of those, she will have overcome odds of 60,466,176 to 1, more than 60 million to 1. Odds of these magnitudes are well into the range of the odds discussed by Jung. Moreover, we have been dealing here with a precisely circumscribed set of events where we know the odds, whereas in some at least of the cases cited by Jung, one is drawing on a virtual infinity of events and possibilities of combination. In such a continual flood of possibilities, may one not expect the apparently miraculous to occur once in a while? Let us revert to the example produced by the roulette wheel. As it happens, it was the number 4 which I observed to come up 4 times in succession. Already the situation begins to assume a meaningful aspect. One is inevitably more impressed by the number 4 occurring 4 times than one would be by the number 36 occurring 4 times. Statistically, however, the 2 events have equal value. Now let us suppose an additional and by no means unlikely circumstance. Suppose that on the morning of the event at the casino, I had received a letter from my car insurance company stating that, as I had made 4 claims in the last 4 years, the company felt reluctantly compelled to decline to offer me further cover. Might one not have retired instantly to a life of prayer in the face of such cosmic karma? I have given the example a frivolous content. It could easily be given a more serious one, say 4 friends killed in an avalanche on the same day, which one heard about subsequently. My feeling about many of the reported miracles of coincidence is that they are, alas, nothing of the kind. That is, that they are indeed coincidences, but not in any sense miraculous. We look now at one more, certainly non-meaningful coincidence, and then compare this with further of the possibly meaningful examples cited by Jung. While waiting for a friend, I observed that a leaf falls from a tree above and floats in at the window of a stationary bus standing at a bus stop. There are 2 questions. 1. What are the odds against that particular leaf having entered that particular window of that particular bus? 2. What does it mean? The answer to the second question is easy. Nothing. The answer to the first question is difficult. It is actually impossible to give any real answers. What are the parameters of our estimate to be? The number of leaves at present on the tree, or a number of leaves the tree has in its lifetime? What is our time scale? The life of the bus, or the fraction of its life that it has spent on this route? Must we take account too of all the other buses on the route, or all the trees next to all the bus stops? We flounder in a morass of pointless speculation and arbitrary decisions. 2 further examples recorded by Jung follow. A woman took some photographs of her son in 1914 and left the roll of film to be developed in Strasbourg. In the interim, the First World War broke out and she never collected the film. In 1916, however, she bought a roll of film in Frankfurt to take pictures of her newly born daughter. When these pictures were developed, they were found to be double exposed. Under the pictures of her daughter were the pictures taken of her son in 1914. Somehow, the old film had not been developed and had gone back into circulation with a batch of new films. That's very weird. In the second of these examples, Jung tells how, at a critical point in the psychoanalysis of one of his patients, the woman concerned was telling him of a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. As she spoke, Jung heard a tapping noise at the window behind him. A flying insect was knocking itself against the pane. He opened the window to admit the creature, which proved to be a scarabid beetle, a rose chaffer. Contrary to its usual habits, it had apparently at that moment felt an urge to get into a darkened room. For Jung, one of the important features of this event was that in ancient Egypt the scarab was one of the symbols of rebirth. What is one to make of these extraordinary occurrences? For myself, a criterion involving meaning, involving a dynamic, involving some kind of outcome is required. Having said that, it becomes necessary to distinguish between real meaning and seeming, but actually meaningless meaning, as in the case of the number 4 occurring 4 times. This is no easy task. In my own opinion, the case of the photographic film is astonishing but meaningless. That is to say, there was no outcome to the events, no confirmation of anything. Such was the case with the 4 4s on the roulette wheel. Such is the case with any sequence of any 4 numbers on the roulette wheel. Such was the case with the leaf falling from the tree into the window of the bus. Granted, the odds against the film turning up as it did were phenomenal, but quite how phenomenal we have in any case no real means of knowing. Once again, what would be one's parameters? But the odds, as such, are not really the point. Jung's second example is less easy to dismiss, for there is an interpretative element in it and a kind of self-justification. There appears to be something more to the event than the mere juxtaposition of circumstances which have no dynamic relationship and are joined by no necessity. Jung and the patient were after all engaged in something, the analysis, and were seeking an outcome. This outcome happened to be precisely a psychological rebirth. In short, the situation had a certain structure or purposiveness, not the case in any of the examples discussed in the last few pages. Precisely this purposive and structural element is what we find in the I Ching. When consulted in the manner prescribed, it apparently yields an answer which is appropriate to the question and to the condition of the inquirer. The coincidence has not arisen fortuitously, it has been produced, nor has it arisen in the context of an infinity of possibilities. The scope of the text of the I Ching is large, but by no means infinite. The I Ching is probably as near as we will ever get in this area to the controlled experiment of the physical sciences. To produce a miraculous, that is, an extremely unusual outcome on demand is of course precisely what the believer would so much like to be able to offer, and this is what the skeptic and the scientist insist on. One is, of course, not denying anyone the right to ask for some kind of evidence, but one does request the scientist to approach the matter with far less than his usual rigidity, or, if that statement is pejorative, with other than his normally reasonable criteria. For it seems that the very intention to test out such claims as these effectively destroys the circumstances, the essential ambience in which these phenomena occur. Once again, the skeptic may exclaim, "How convenient! Whatever I specify as a test or criterion you claim disrupts the phenomena. You agree that it is not unreasonable to ask for evidence but refuse to accept the conditions or the outcome of a test case." We hear that all the time. The matter is actually worse than that. In a place of objective evidence, one is even proposing to reintroduce the criterion of subjective conviction, the very criterion that, for example, sent so many unfortunate wretches unjustifiably to the stake. To enter these questions in any further detail, however, would lead us too far from the central argument of this book. One can reiterate this much. First, by reason of the concept of the moment that never occurs twice. Whatever else one may ask, one can hardly in this area insist on the repeatability in the sense understood in the physical sciences. A man can never step into the same stream twice. Second, that there may well be a fundamental difference between the artificially contrived moment for experimental purposes and the moment which arises from the chance, and perhaps once and for all, combination of a possibly astronomically large number of circumstances and involves in particular a state of mind. With this very brief examination of a System B text and its rationale or irrationale in some detail, we again widen the discussion to embrace the whole of this type of literature and the knowledge which incorporates. One has made the briefest of attacks on the question of the validity of the claim to value of these writings. This attempt is now abandoned in favour of the further description simply of the general nature of knowledge too. Yeah, so we're on this part 3 of this chapter. Hold on. Just check my big screen. Yeah, you're on about the beetle, Ralph, that must have freaked them out when they were just finishing their session and a scarab comes in. Yeah, that is weird. Okay, so part 3. The scientific knowledge 1, is a product of the ego. It is the most evolved of the ego's attempts to understand, control, and dominate its environment. These attempts have their origin in the wish of the ego to stay alive, in pursuit of which aim it will readily take life from others. The basic function of the ego is to ensure the survival of the individual. All ego functions are, in the last analysis, directed to this end. Knowledge 2 is the product of the self. As we have repeatedly observed, the functioning and the attributes of the self always take an opposite form from those of the ego. Thus the self submits itself to the environment. It is not essentially concerned with staying alive, much less with taking life from others, but with giving life, that is, amongst other things, of reproducing itself. The basic role of the self is to ensure the survival of the species. For this reason, the role of the self is frequently a sacrificial one. That's also like the like projection, isn't it? Is that the self, where he says here that the self is not essentially concerned with staying alive, but with giving life, and amongst other things, of reproducing itself. Well, that sort of goes back to what we discussed about projection being a weapon of the a weapon of the unconscious. So like a defense mechanism. And so what projection is aiming to do is reproduce itself in other people, which is what the self is trying to do. The self's always trying to reproduce itself. So the basic role of the self is to ensure the survival of the species. For this reason, the role of the self is frequently a sacrificial one. For reasons which have been sufficiently discussed elsewhere, the ego is concerned primarily with the external universe and mirrors many attributes of that universe in its own structure and modes of thought. Thus the ego is concerned with cause and effect too, with serial or sequential events. Therefore, its thought is essentially linear, and its models and schemas of all kinds cannot help but show progression, development and continuity. Our conscious concept of time is derived wholly from the serial nature of events, from the observation that events take place one after the other. Without some form of change, indeed, we would have not only no measure of time, but no concept of it at all. The self is concerned with the inner universe and the internal environment. It incorporates and reveals many features of that environment in the structure and mode of its thought. Change certainly occurs in the inner as well as in the outer world. There are, however, significant differences. First, the rate of change in the inner world is a variable, not a fixed quantity. Second, there are periods when the rate of change is slow enough to be considered or felt as stasis during deep sleep, perhaps. Moreover, of those changes which do occur, many are not linear but cyclic. Such a sequence of events returns continually to its point of origin, which you can see in the ancient religions, which are cyclical and all about cycles and circles. These considerations enable us in particular to comprehend the nature of time as understood and expressed by System B. The concept of the moment, i.e. a stasis of varying duration, has already been mooted earlier and will be examined further. There is additionally the notion of timelessness, of being outside time, which is a notable feature of many religio philosophies, the eternal truth, and so on. Timelessness may perhaps best be thought of as the moment which lasts forever, the condition of permanent stasis. It is in their conception and handling of time that System A and System B constructs differ, perhaps most widely, and by means of which they may most satisfactorily be identified. Before pursuing these notions of time, there are other less specific points to make in connection with the general nature of knowledge 2. Unlike knowledge 1, it takes what are tantamount to 2 major forms. It can exist in more or less its own right, as in dreams, and in the absence of normal consciousness, or it may be found more or less integrally combined with normal consciousness. In other words, knowledge 2 can be genuinely unconscious, or it may be manifest in waking consciousness, and then either as a help or a hindrance to the affairs of consciousness, a partner as it were, or an opponent, a guest or an intruder. Thus there arises the question both of the style and of the extent of the intrusion. That System B can productively predominate in waking consciousness we see in the stable uppercase B, lowercase a personality. And what is produced is knowledge 2. When System A predominates, one has a stable uppercase A, lowercase b personality, and the product is knowledge 1. Knowledge 2 can be further conveniently considered under 4 headings. 1. Self-awareness. 2. The control of the autonomic nervous system. 3. Accounts of the universe. 4. Real understanding of and possible control over objective phenomena. 1. Self-awareness. It would seem that System B, by means which are far from clear to us, is able to perceive both itself and the nervous system as a whole. In terms of symbolic imagery, it describes itself, the unconscious, variously as a woman, a dark cave, the moon, an animal, a misshapen dwarf, and so on. This book has, of course, suggested that some of these descriptions are a literal approximation to the size, location, and mode of functioning of the cerebellum. Consciousness is described in masculine images: a god, a king, the sun, a mighty wizard, the vault of heaven filled with angels. The imagery of consciousness, that is, System B's imagery of consciousness, is perhaps less varied and more repetitious than the imagery of the unconscious. In general, System B's view of consciousness suggests approval, or perhaps awe is a better word. However, the negative properties of System A are also mentioned: the Midas touch, which kills the living, the power to shatter the mirror or to enslave with a name. It is interesting that both Midas and the sun turn things to gold. One has already also suggested that certain features of legend are further descriptions of aspects of the nervous system and its functioning: the journey, the mirror image, the cross, and so on. 2. The control of the autonomic system. This might seem a mere tautology. Obviously, the control of the autonomic system is under the control of the autonomic system. However, this is not what is meant. What is meant is the purposive control of the physiological system, which argues for an intelligence, the appreciation of outcomes and results. One is thinking of such matters as hysterical paralysis, hysterical pregnancy, hysterical amnesia, and so on. of the various forms and motivated nature of psychosomatic illness in general, of the production of, for instance, bleeding stigmata and so on the hands of religious neurotics, and on the positive side of faith healing in its various forms and fringe medicine as a whole. 3. Description of the universe. Most religio-philosophies contain a detailed and non-scientific description and explanation of the universe, of its purpose and meaning, the principles under which it operates, its origins and ultimate destination, and so on. System B sees, and is much taken for obvious reason, with the cycles it observes in the universe, that of the seasons of the sun rising and setting each day and so forth, and with moments of various kinds, of which more is said again subsequently. The question of whether and to what extent these cycles and moments are really there is partly dealt with under the next heading. Understanding and control of objective phenomena. It is here that we come to the very vexed question of the reality of System B's view. Many might be prepared to concede that there is an unconscious, that it is autonomous and self-aware, that it does in some strange way perceive and describe not only itself, but also the external universe. They might even go on to agree that in terms of the human relationships and the nature and structure of society, System B has a genuine contribution to make, one perhaps that System A cannot provide. Such agreement one might obtain. There is nothing wrong with this as far as it goes. However, the real crux is whether or not System B has anything meaningful or useful to say about the non-human, the physical, objective universe. And perhaps in addition, or instead, whether it has some appreciation of, say, the forces in the universe which cause life to come into being in the first place, and which may, by their very nature, be partially or wholly inaccessible to System A. To repeat the first suggestion, however, has System B any direct, objectively useful understanding of the external universe? Can it even affect that universe in some way? This latter question is, of course, one of the banes and bugbears of Western science, one of the ghostly possibilities which still skirt, or surround, the academic scientific establishment, and so far refuse to finally lie down and die, once and for all. The I Ching is a powerful weapon in the armoury of the dissidents. It alone must give us cause to refuse, for the moment, to consider these issues in any way settled. On the score of the practical and tangible, it is right to mention also the Chinese method of acupuncture in the treatment of disease. This is not faith healing, and is moreover now practised in a number of clinics in Western Europe. Its philosophical rationale is that of the I Ching. Finally, the phenomenon of psychokinesis, the movement of objects without physical agency, which is allegedly behind poltergeist happenings which can apparently be produced by the so-called physical mediums of the spiritualists, and has been given a statistical clearance certificate by J.B. Ryan, offers further possibilities. The discussion of this matter is not a direct concern of this book. However, quite why a religious movement dedicated to spiritualism should have such a direct and apparently paradoxical connection with physical matter is a question that does not usually seem to be asked. At this point, we can revert to the question of time, first to the moment, then to the cycle, as displayed in expression of knowledge too. Astrology is centrally founded on the concept of the moment, in particular on the moment of birth. Although, for general purposes, the day of one's birth will give the astrologer something to go on, for a really accurate horoscope, he requires not only the hour, but the very minute of that occurrence. According to astrology, it is in the constellation of planets pertaining at the moment of birth that one's character and fate may be discerned. Thereafter, in later life, particular groupings and regroupings of the planets will provide moments favourable and unfavourable to various kinds of action on the part of someone. In the general context of astrology, one need hardly recall the role of the bright star in the birth of Christ. Christianity, however, is not so much concerned with the moment of birth as with the moment of rebirth, which is both the moment of conversion or dedication to Christ and the moment of death, that is, earthly death, and the condition of the soul at that time. In one sense, it matters little what has preceded these moments. All past crimes and failings are wiped out. The moment is an extremely important aspect also of magic. The whole of the magic ritual builds up to and is designed to procure the moment when the devil appears or the magic works. One is also speaking here very much of the physical moment in space. The pentangle must be correctly drawn, the items of ritual correctly positioned and correctly compounded. Normal time and geographical place, e.g. midnight, the graveyard, the crossroads, may additionally play an important part. Similar instances, certainly on ritual and to an extent on ingredients, is seen, for example, in Catholicism. For a dying man to repent while alone is no guarantee of salvation. Without a consecrated priest present at that moment to shrive him and give him absolution, his soul is in peril. In the magic ritual, there are also, however, strong elements both of the cycle and the orgasm. Outside black magic, though, of course, linked to it are the moments of sympathetic or natural magic. The compelling moments of nature must have been considerably more impressive for primitive man than they are for us. The middle of the night, actual midnight, had already been mentioned, and the middle of the day also seems special to us, the highest point of the sun. So do midsummer and midwinter day, and the midpoints in the year between these, the equinoxes, the points where day and night are of equal length. Certain unusual and occasionally disastrous movements of the tides and runnings of fish and so forth are also observable on these occasions. The role of the moment in augury and fortune telling has already been discussed. What is of additional interest is that in connection with the moment of consultation, many different peoples in many parts of the world have independently evolved in essence the same method, that of acausal randomization. Thus, one consults in various times and places the wheeling of the flights of birds, the pattern of an animal's entrails in the dust, or that of a collection of bones, the random fall of tarot or playing cards, the tea leaves in a cup. With the I Ching, we use yarrow stalks or coins. Further, the pattern of the stars and planets in astrology and the lines on the palm of a hand in palmistry may, too, in one sense, be regarded as examples of the same procedure. Though here non-random factors conceivably also play a part. As already mooted above, one of the purposes of the randomized consultation procedure appears to be to remove the element of normal causality and or of simple human influence. A further purpose may be to focus the attention without giving the conscious and interfering mind anything to work on. Is it not as if consciousness is given something to occupy it uselessly while the real work is going on? Compare here the legend of appeasing Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld, with music or with drugged cakes so that one may pass. Cerberus would here represent consciousness. Finally, there is the question of moments in human relationships, not in the sense discussed earlier, but in the sense of knowing when to say what to whom. This is an intuitive form of knowledge sadly decayed in the West. The fact remains, however, that a word in the right place at the right time is very much a reality. A remark made to a person at a crux in his affairs can have an effect it would not have had before or ever will again. This position is widely appreciated in psychoanalysis, and some of the art of being a good analyst is to know precisely when to give a patient a particular insight. In the majority of cases, such moments cannot be forced, and if they do not arise, that, in general, must be that. Outside psychoanalysis, the concept of the moment is a living, day-to-day reality, paradoxically, perhaps only for the salesman, the good salesman, who knows when to edge his customer further towards the moment of purchase and when to refrain. Is this possibly one reason why Easterners make better merchants, if they do? I mean, that's an interesting point. Is that when you say something can mean the difference between success and failure, and we've probably all experienced that. Is that saying something at the wrong time results in the wrong outcome, but saying something at the right time, who knows, can get you the right thing. And his point that, like merchants, people who are merchants are better at saying the right thing at the right time. It's a very system B way of acting. The notion of endless time, as suggested, perhaps the moment which lasts forever, the wish often made by lovers, is similarly widespread in System B literatures and practices. Sometimes one has the variant of a vast cycle, usually repeated endlessly. In Christianity we have world without end, eternal life, forever and ever, amen, from everlasting to everlasting, immortal, unchanging. 1,000 ages in thy sight are like an evening gone, and so on, the concept of eternity and infinity. As in the case of the moment, eternal time is here also translated into other psychological modalities: boundless grace, infinite wisdom, and undying love. The element of eternity is also found widely distributed in legend and in particular romantic literature. Thus, as cited above, one always swears to love forever. This concept has brought forth some of the most superb romantic poems. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. In the fairy story, the survivors, usually the lovers, live happily ever after. The general setting of a fairy story is equally timeless. Once upon a time. Vampires and such beings, unless interfered with, also live forever. In another area, it is of considerable interest that Adolf Hitler felt motivated to set a finite time limit to his System A empire, the 1,000-year Reich. Perhaps a long time by conscious standards, but nothing at all to System B. On the other side, we have an extremely popular film in Russia, which the Russian government has made some half a dozen times, presumably to accommodate changes in its attitudes to certain political figures, called Lenin Lives Forever. Communism is, as is typical of the System B product, is as eternal as it is inevitably correct. Marx viewed the capitalist system as excessively finite, replete with the seeds of its own destruction. The foregoing comments concerning time and the formulations of System B are, it will be appreciated, not in any sense offered as a validation of these formulations. That is another matter again. It is a question here only of by their fruits ye shall know them. One has principally been offered further evidence of the postulated unity of System B views, and conversely of System A views. To repeat an earlier analogy, just as all varieties of Negroes, despite their many within-group differences, have that in common which makes them Negroes and not Caucasoids, so the within-system similarities of the products of each of the two major systems are greater than any within-system differences. And these within-system differences are, in any case, of a lesser order than the between-system divergence. Part 4. Some further comments are in order here on the relationship of women to time, and on the functioning of which women are capable in their own right, that is, in terms other than as pale, ill-functioning copies of men. The stories of women's inability to be ready on time, and propensity to be late for appointments, and worse, not to appear at all. Their general difficulties with time schedules of all kinds are legion. These stories may or may not be true, or if true, exaggerated. The interest, perhaps, centres on the fact that such legends exist at all. If women do have some kind of difficulty with normal time, that is, time on the clock, System A time, this would agree well with the view that women are more governed by System B, which has, as we have shown, a very different sense of and approach to time. If the cycles and moments view of time derives from the functioning and structure of the autonomic system, and since women are more ruled by their autonomic system from the physiological level upwards, as seems to be the case, then one would expect a woman's view of time to have to do with the moment and the cycle, to be, in other words, of the System B variety. A woman late for an appointment is frequently angry at being told she is late. This may be because she knows only too well that she is late. At other times, however, she seems not so much angry as puzzled or bewildered at the charge. It is almost as if she is saying something like, "How can I be late when I'm here at the time that I should be and ready to be here?" Or, "I am sure I left in plenty of time." In these sentences, late means according to the clock, while time means subjective or System B time. Subjectively, she is on time. Objectively, she is late. Turning to the second matter, the question of what women can undertake in their own right, we consider briefly the nature of cultural heroes, and in particular the nature of the female of that species. The vast majority of cultural heroes are men, as we saw earlier. Can one indeed speak at all of a cultural heroine, and if so, who is she? First, one needs to exclude all women who are obviously substitute men, such as Brunhild, Boudica, or the Amazons. These leave one with very few notable women: Joan of Arc, Nurse Cavil, the female pharaohs of ancient Egypt, never an administrative post, incidentally, the Earth Mother, the priestesses of the mysteries, the witch. Are not all of these women and all of these functions actually most nearly summarized in the concept of the witch? It is undeniable that there are certain apparent contradictions involved. Some of this ground has already in fact been covered elsewhere in these pages. One has there shown that the differences between these various females are not as great as at first appears to be the case. Witches, those spinsters who destroy babies and hate marriages, are not in fact enemies of sex and are in a sense wives to the devil. The priestesses of the mysteries were no stranger to sex. Nuns are brides of Christ. Mary bore God's baby, and so on. There is admittedly a range of behaviour here, revealing various differences at various points, but the spectrum is not really discontinuous. Turning to the present day, we find that it is women far more than men who read horoscopes, have fortunes told, and are superstitious. One notes too that most palmists and crystal gazers are women, though perhaps more men are astrologers. In respect of spiritualism, a phenomenon of the 19th and 20th centuries, my impression, confirmed also by officials of the movement whose opinions I sought, is that 1. More women than men are mediums, and 2. More women than men are good mediums. The trend seems to be inescapable. Women appear to be naturally drawn to these areas. The present book has argued and does argue that the vast majority of women are fighting a wholly lost cause in attempting to join the System A bandwagon, and should indeed set about creating its opposite number in terms of System B. One is not proposing, though no doubt I will be misquoted in certain quarters as having proposed it, that women should spend their time organising black masses in Cornwall or dancing naked round a desecrated altar at midnight. I am, however, proposing that they should devote themselves to the areas and activities in which their true interests and their talents seem to lie. In some instances, as we know, these areas overlap or are adjacent to certain areas in which men are occupied, writing, acting, and so on. In general, I suggest that women should stop trying to justify themselves to men, and most of all stop trying to act like men, and set about justifying themselves to themselves, a task they have hitherto almost wholly neglected. To the extent that the exponents of astrology, palmistry, clairvoyance, and to some extent religion have attempted to justify themselves to System A, they have become trivialized and are a laughingstock. Women as such have suffered precisely the same trivialization by accepting the terms of justification laid down by System A, i.e. by men. We do not as yet know what real possibilities, if any, exist in knowledge too. There are, however, what one might call promising indications. Similarly, we do not know what women are really capable of. One is not at all trying to say that, for instance, religion is necessarily right about certain matters, or even any matters. What one is saying is that System A is necessarily wrong in the approach it has made to such areas of human activity. One is certainly only too anxious to separate the real, whatever that turns out to be, from the false in these matters, the essential from the accidental, to introduce whatever stands up to examination into the accepted body of human knowledge. But this cannot be done in the terms laid down by the supporters of System A, that is, by well-qualified but literal half-wits. So that's the end of that chapter, and it's 25 past. So rather than start a new chapter just for 5 minutes, I'll probably end it soonish. But yeah, I mean, it's 1972, and when this book was written, the only way out is in. I'm terrible with being ready on time. I can do it, but it takes so much focus and anxiety. Yeah. So Ralph's asking, so Stan was advocating thought patrolling. He's advocating patrolling of the women who are what you'd call cheerleaders, I suppose. He's advocating cheerleader patrolling. So the women who gleefully support men's view of women rather than being themselves. But it's a massive task to undertake as well. Is trying to work out what actually is the role of women in the world, and then to then pursue that role. So yeah, but it's 1972, so he's it's sort of feminism's just coming into its own, early 70s. And he's proposing something that probably would have been better for women in general than feminism, which is the pursuing of something a 50% of the human experience. 50% of the human experience, and sort of trying to put your best people onto that job. So your best people, going by what he said, your best people for the job of acausal examination of the acausality and the sort of unconscious paranormal world would be women. So if you put your best people on the job, you would naturally put all women to the job of researching the paranormal. Instead, what they've done is put women into the jobs, into men's jobs, and now you've just got loads of unhappy women. The only way out is saying it is a massive task, and I've had a lot of resistance even from the feminists. The feminists are still trying to compete with men or try to do the man thing and hate and resent all women who have a different point of view to that. It's really annoying. Yeah, I fucking totally understand that. And any sensible person that you speak to about it has always had that same criticism of feminism, is that it's actually destructive for women. But here we're being shown imagine if instead of feminism, women had been put to the task of researching the paranormal. How far would we be with that now? 40, 50 years later, coming up to 50 years of the anniversary of Total Man. So 50 years later, how much further would we be in the research of the paranormal if we put our best people on it? Who knows? So it's never too late to start as well, because just because you missed out on 50 years of it doesn't mean that you should just give up and think, oh well, we missed out, that was an opportunity wasted, so maybe we should just carry on getting jobs and being drunks and being unhappy. No. So the message is to women to begin pursuing the paranormal, because you are the best shot we've got. And it does mean understanding yourself as a woman, not as a man, not as a not as a sort of masculinized woman. And things like time and the sort of obsessions of women, the time, changes, moments. I think it's really important what he says, that the women's minds are geared towards moments and not so much on the actual linear time, just moments in time. And so those moments are when the real paranormal arises, only in those moments. The only way out is in. Yeah, I agree. I've spent my life doing that, researching paranormal on an experiential level, which is the feminine way. Yes. Ralph Exum. Feminism teaches women to be everything a man can be instead of everything he cannot. Anon. That was written by Anonymous. That's probably the most sensible thing Anonymous have ever said. The only way out is in, i.e. not research paranormal from the isolationary, microscopic, scientific way, which is a masculine methodology, left-brained system A way. Yeah. That's it, yeah. It should be on an experiential level, which is about moments again. I'm telling you, there's gold. There's gold in Stan's work. He was well ahead of his time. We in a way we haven't wasted 50 years, but we've been pursuing, not we, because we're not all doing this, but pursuing pointless things like robotics or mobile telephony or wireless technology, when, as will become more apparent as we move on through Stan's work, all of this stuff is available to us naturally. These things are just analogues. All these things, these telephones, wireless systems, free energy, or energy that you have to like put loads of money into, and space travel, and all of these things, telepathy, all of the stuff we have today is analogues of what's actually inside us, of what's real, of what we've missed out on. We've taken who's we? They've taken a sort of around path, but perhaps it's part of what we needed to do as humans. Perhaps we did need to go through all this stuff, take ourselves to the brink, just to see how destructive it all is, and then rediscover ourselves. A renaissance of the human again, and rediscover what it is about us that we've missed out, because we've approached we've gone down all of the blind alleys, and we've approached all of these topics, and they all come to nothing. There is no artificial intelligence. There is nothing at the end of it all. Maybe it's going to take that for us to be able to go back again and rediscover something about ourselves that we missed. So that's why it's important to get this work out and spread the ideas, because if anything, they haven't been researched, they haven't been seriously looked at. They might not be 100% right, but he's right. Stan was right that we are a hybrid, that's quite a large part of the theory. You know, a lot of the theory hinges on the fact on the idea of us being a hybrid. So if that's been proven, then how much of the other stuff is true? Anyway, Ralph Hexham, bring back the Vrildamen. Yeah, that's probably what they were doing. We haven't wasted our time. The only way out is in. We haven't wasted our time because Gen X had to heal and get self-esteem first to be able to do the work I'm doing. We could only have done that after the boomers' female denial victimhood period. Yeah, that is true as well. Yeah. I saw someone talking the other day on Twitter about millennials. Oh, millennials had it so hard because they had boomers, and boomers were this and that, and millennials are this and that, and so boomers. And one of my friends on Twitter said, "Yeah, you've missed out like a whole generation of people between those two that you're talking about, and only people from that generation understand how important being part of that generation is." And it's true, you know, like the boomers were so in love with themselves that they called the generation after them X. They couldn't even think of a name for us, so they just called us Generation X. You don't have a name. And then the millennials, you know, they've got their like we're millennial, we're on the cusp of a new fucking age or whatever they're saying. You know, and they're all obsessed with themselves. They love it. They love themselves. They're obsessed with their action on the world and all the rest of it. And you know, Gen X is there in the middle, the quiet kid, who's yet to really fully, you know, use their power. Yeah, so you could be onto something. Right, so if anyone knows any more Vril Damon for The Only Way Out Is In, then send them over. Careful, Ralph says careful, lot of loonies about. That is also true. Yeah. So how do you filter how do you filter the loonies out? Anyway, right, I'm gonna go. So for next week, Mike's slightly less hot. That's what I'm gonna change. But apart from that, everything else seems alright. Yeah? Good. Okay. So thanks everyone in the chat, everyone who tuned in. And I'll see you again next week.